Hello and welcome to Wizards, Warriors and Words, a fantasy writing advice podcast. I'm Jed Herne, author of Fires of the Dead, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, starting with Mike Fletcher.
Michael R. Fletcher, author of Blackstone Heart and stuff.
I think it's me. I'm Rob J. Hayes, author of, I'm going to go with this one, City of Kings, which nobody has ever read.
One of my favorite covers of yours.
Yeah, I love that cover.
This is a terrible fantasy cover. It's a beautiful cover. I love it. It's a terrible fantasy cover.
Agreed.
Don't emulate it.
Agreed.
Have you thought about rebranding?
Yeah, I've thought about rebranding the entire 6-book saga, First Earth saga, with more covers that are more in line with each other, basically, and probably more sellable.
There's another episode we need to do.
Yes. Covers.
Absolutely.
Can we get Felix on that?
Yeah, we'll get Felix on for sure.
He'll come on.
All right, and Dyrk, our last host, do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Dyrk Ashton, and the author of the Paternas trilogy.
Fantastic. And last episode, I promised that we were going to talk about openings. Instead, we spent the entire episode just talking about opening lines, which goes to show how much there is to discuss on this topic. So this episode will be about more opening stuff. So our first chapter and our first couple of chapters specifically, basically, how do you write a good beginning that hooks readers and hopefully gets them into your story? So Rob, what are kind of the things that you're considering when you're constructing your opening chapters?
Prologues. All the prologues.
Oh,
everything
boy.
must have
Here
a
we
prologue.
go. I hate prologues, but continue.
Even if it's only 2 sentences, right?
Yep, doesn't matter. Well, we're encroaching there. No, prologues, I love them. I tend to use them to set the plot, basically, to introduce the plot. If you look at, let's go with my latest, Fawn's
Gambit.
I use the prologue literally to set up the plot of there is this contest that's going on where the gods of the world are trying to choose a new king, and they do it by selecting a mortal to play a game basically for them, this sort of scavenger hunt that they have to go and do. And that's the general plot of the book, and it is literally introduced in the prologue via the perspective of a god. And I mean, part of that is because with the Mortal Techniques books, one thing I wanted to do was have the plot very evident from the beginning. It's the same in Never Die, not in the prologue, obviously, but in Never Die, I think by the end of the second chapter, you know the plot of the book. So I like to introduce it early on, so people aren't sitting there wondering what the plot of the book is. What's the point? So yeah, for me, I like to use prologues to introduce one of the characters and maybe the plot, and then I like to sort of like introduce the main character in chapter 1, basically. That's a general gist.
I think that's a good point you bring up about actually like establishing the tone early on. In your case, making sure that readers know what the overall plot is going to be, because then it means that the people who enjoy that stuff are going to continue reading all your book, and the people who don't enjoy that stuff are going to stop at that stage and not, get 50% through and then stop then, and then maybe leave an angry review because your book was something different from what they were expecting. So,
I get those all the time anyway.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's a good point too. The idea of letting them know the kind of thing, the kind of story they're going to get into. There's a really good, in a previous episode, I talked about the writing book that helped me with my craft, how to read novels like a professor. Jed brought it up in the last episode, and he has a really great point about how the first few pages are really about, even though they're about setting up, you have to give a hint at least of the world, when it is, where it is, what kinds of characters, creatures, things might be involved. You can, there are any number of things you can do with an opening chapter. But he said honestly, its most important role is to teach them how to read this book, in the way you write your prose, in the way that you structure things. So if you're going to do things like I do, which is a bit of what's called head hopping, because it's more of an omniscient point of view a lot of the time. The camera will zoom in to tight thirds, but it will also come back out and know what everybody's thinking and seeing and doing at some points at the farthest point. So I knew that I was going to be doing that. And once I read that book, I went back and made sure that I put some of the weird things that I was going to do in that first chapter to ease them in to what they could expect coming through. Like there's a part where a character, Kabir, in the first chapter comes out, and we're following him in more of a close third point of view, and he speaks to a couple of guys, and then he walks away, but the camera stays with them, right? So even though he's gone and we've been with him, now we're with just these guys, and they speak a few lines. So that's the kind of thing you really wouldn't see in a true strict tight third. That starts to edge more into the omniscient point of view, or the way I like to think it, a free indirect discourse, or a floating camera kind of point of view. So you want to, if you're going to do things like that, you want to do that then. It's a bad idea to do the first chapter in first person if the rest of the book is not going to be in first person, if the rest is going to be in third person. I've seen that with where, they do an opening or a prologue in a different tense, present tense instead of past tense, things like that. If you're going to do things like that, you need to do that later, because you're setting up your reader to expect something for the rest of the book, and then you change it for the whole rest of the book, right? That's just my advice for what it's worth.
Yeah,
When you say that, but I've
setting
certainly
expectations.
seen a few books recently that play with, especially perspectives. Like you have certain chapters which are by first person, and other chapters by third person, and
yeah. But
and
you
all
want to be
sorts.
careful about how you open the book when you do that, though. Was kind of my point. Very often, like I'll even do some things that are different later in the book, but it can be really jarring. Now, if you do the first one in first person, second one in third person, then the third chapter in first person, then people will start to get the idea. But if you're just kind of haphazardly bouncing back and forth, that can get really, really confusing. So I would say then use those first 2 and 3 chapters to teach your reader how to read the book if it's going to be something that goes on longer. Does that make sense, Rob?
It does, yes.
Oh no, it does, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it comes back down to just like establishing expectations, and that is in terms of, what kind of tense can you expect? What kind of tone is this thing? It's probably going to be weird if your first chapter is like, this really like gritty thing with lots of people dying, and then the rest of the book is like just this very light-hearted, fluffy adventure. Maybe that can work, but the people who like the gritty stuff are going to be feeling like you lied to them and you set up false promises.
Fletcher totally gets away with that in Beyond Redemption.
Oh yeah,
they're all.
I mean, people that don't make it to first chapter don't realize it's about bunnies and unicorns for the, with
there you go.
rainbows.
It's all rainbows,
happy rainbows and Skittles coming out of their butts.
That sounds kind of horrific.
I was waiting for Fletcher to chime in and just be like, it's all about tone. I mean, how far into Beyond Redemption before characters start spitting?
First chapter, right off. Snotty nose.
Second line.
Snotty nose.
It might
and
actually be that. I can't remember.
Snotty nose, dirty matted hair, and spitting. First chapter.
From memory, when I actually opened up the book, there was a big spit just on the first page. And that really established a tone for me. So
Somebody
quite
spit
effective.
on the first page of your book? There was
yeah, I
like
think
It's Fletcher.
You
He
know how
did it to
some
every single
authors-
book.
Yeah,
That-
like you know
that's
how some authors
disgusting.
sign their books. Fletcher like puts a bit of his mucus in every book.
Might not. Well, okay, we're not going to
Presses
go
on,
there.
and then finger paints his signature.
Yes. Sorry, Fletch. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you consider?
Yeah, okay. It's not all about spit or tone, Rob.
Snot. It's more about
Snot.
snot.
So, all right, we talked a lot last episode about first lines. First lines are like your initial hook. That's your like you're getting into the flesh of the reader, and you're going, "Come with me, you little fucker." You got to read a little bit more now because you've.
What's Rob holding up?
What page is that?
That's page 4, but it's the second page of the first chapter.
Rob is looking through Beyond Redemption for the first spit reference.
Dust from the road tickled Benek's already raw throat, and he sneezed, spraying a wad of bright green snot from his nostrils.
Mucus
There
fans,
you go.
You have found the
Proof it is
perfect
all
book.
about snot.
It's all about snot. So, but the first chapter, once you get past the first line, the first chapter, it's your hook. You are, I mean, Dyrk talked about, setting expectations and stuff. But I mean, my approach, what I see the first chapter as it's really dragging them on. If the end of your first chapter, the reader isn't going, fuck, what? I got to read more, then you have failed.
Yeah,
I think
simple.
Blackstone Heart might be the first time I kind of really got that right.
Is it your prologue? Absolutely nails it. It's brilliant.
Did I write a prologue?
I think is it a prologue?
What? There's no no. Hold
No?
on. Luckily I
thought
have
you'd
a
done this
copy.
prologue.
Wait.
I read an
maybe
arc.
did. Oh shit! There's a prologue. I put a prologue in my own book, and I hate prologues. Son of a bitch!
It's a really good prologue.
Fuck!
It
I
is.
suck at this. It's a brilliant prologue, which I totally remember.
You are a great author, but a terrible Michael R. Fletcher.
I am not good at being him.
Just further evidence that Mike doesn't actually write his own books, and they're all by Rob, because
Son
Rob
of
knew
a
way more about what was going on there than you did.
It's embarrassing.
No, I back that. Like, even books I haven't written a while ago, I've like already forgotten so many things that happen in them. But yeah, it does have a prologue. There you go.
Yeah, I wrote that like 3 years ago. I can't be expected to remember
Yeah.
something for 3 years. And
You can
Beyond
barely remember
Redemption.
what
Oh my god,
happens
that was
early in the game.
2009. I wrote that. Like,
Oof.
You were
Zero
like
memory.
12.
It
That's
wasn't
why
even Michael Fletcher back in
please, I
those
was-
days.
the little
I
boy,
wasn't.
little kids
what
are
was I?
obsessed with snot and
I was
farts
11.
and shitting themselves. So that's
11.
why.
Yep.
Now we know.
Yeah, that he did that for me. He knew even then that I would come along to tease him about snot, and he was trying to put things in that would appeal to me at the time, so that I would be a fan when I reached him. But I wasn't reading Beyond Redemption when I was 11, unfortunately. So didn't
In
quite
Probably
happen.
for the
2009.
best.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I'm pretty sure it comes with a warning, not for human consumption.
Like a parental advisory warning label on the front.
Look how young that guy looks on the back of the book. Like, who the fuck is that even? Ooh, baby face. Oh my god. I
Oh,
used to be.
wow.
I used to look
Aw.
okay.
You're wearing like
I
a
don't know.
suit and stuff.
You are a hottie. Look at that.
I
Yeah.
went south hard.
Rob and I have dueling covers.
They're holding up copies of Beyond Redemption at the moment for our audio listeners. Yeah, I think the key thing with opening chapters for me is to try to somehow create your story in miniature. So what I mean by that is that with the opening chapter from the Thunder Heist, it is essentially a prison break scene. The main character wakes up in this prison and you think they're about to be executed and stuff happens. And it is a reflection of the wider book as a whole, which is a heist story where things happen, things fail, and they might actually not really be failures, but might be intended parts of the plan. And all of these things are sort of foreshadowed in the opening chapter where you see the main character's ability to kind of like plan to get out of these difficult situations and to problem solve. And it also kind of shows you hints about the world as well, in terms of some of the mutants that are there, the kind of key political forces and different groups that are sort of going around. And sort of like Rob was talking about before, if you enjoy that opening chapter, there's a pretty good likelihood that you're going to enjoy the rest of the book, because what I've basically done is almost write a kind of short story that encapsulates the tone and the themes and sort of the plot of the book, but in a kind of smaller scale setting. And for me, that's been a useful way to consider just starting your book off in general, is like, what is the essence of my story? Okay, this story is about someone, doing heists and problem solving and outwitting a much stronger opponent. How can I create an opening chapter that doesn't necessarily give away what's going to happen in the story, but explores sort of, a little bit of similar things in such a way that it sort of foreshadows and sets up what kind of story we can expect.
I hadn't even, I now remember that I've heard that sort of thing, but I actually am thinking that I kind of did that with.
Yeah, in Paternas. That's what it is, man. Like, you have this opening
Yeah,
chapter where
I kind of, yeah. There's a character who's, we find out, is pretty tough, and then they run into a really scary thing that scares even them. And that's basically how the whole series goes,
Yeah.
right, Rob?
Yeah.
But what's funny is that the first chapter, so what I really wanted to do was, one, give people an idea of how to read this, what kinds of things to expect. For another, I wanted to start hinting at, without saying it outright, hinting at the idea that this character that we're following might not be human, because the books are about the basically based the idea that the myths are real, and some of these gods and legends from myths from around the world actually have incorporated themselves and live among human beings. Some hide away somewhere, and this is a character who's decided to do that. But to get the idea through some of the things that run through, because I hear, I have inner thoughts of the characters, as opposed to outer thoughts. Never understood that term. That that give an idea, and then he does, at the end of the chapter, end up being confronted with a very frightening beastie, that I don't really describe what it looks like, but there are some hints to that, and what it might be. And I never realized I did that. But Jed, you probably don't know. Rob, you probably know that the book, that when Paternas was submitted to the SPFBO in 2016, when I first wrote it, that first and second chapter were switched. The first chapter started with Fee walking down the sidewalk, and it was that chapter, and the second chapter was Kabir. And enough people convinced me, and I absolutely began to believe that those chapters needed to be swapped, because that second chapter doesn't quite set the tone for the rest of the novel. So, and it doesn't have, it feels too different from what the story really is, what the story really is like, and about. So I swapped those two, and at the same time that I redid the covers, and sales suddenly changed.
That doesn't surprise me, because it's a much more dynamic and visual scene, that first chapter, and yeah, it sets the tone and the theme, to be honest.
Yeah.
And whereas the second chapter feels more like this is just some urban fantasy.
Yes.
It's not. Almost just some urban fantasy.
Yeah, almost YA kind of.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Kind of.
The way you have it, yeah, I can't.
City of Bones kind of feel to it.
Yeah, here's a girl wandering down the street. Oh, there's something special about her.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the way you've got it, it just it drags people straight into the scene, into the book, and it introduces a threat, and I think that's a major thing, actually, introducing a threat early on, so you know there's something there. It's like you start you start a book with Darth Vader. There you go. You've got a threat. You know that is just this terrifying thing that is going to be chasing people throughout the entire book.
Yes.
So I certainly haven't done that with my upcoming Spirits of Vengeance. Yeah, I just introduced Darth. Actually, I introduced 5 Darth Vaders in the prologue. And
hell yes. Actually, this was another thing as well that I wanted to bring up. First of all, Dyrk, I'm so glad you changed that around. So a much better book with that sequencing. And second of all, Rob, like with that story and miniature thing, you also totally do that in Never Die, because basically you've got this battle scene between, these two characters with, these certain characters with different powers against an overwhelming enemy. And at the end of it, they die. And it sort of like reflects wider things that happen in the wider story without giving away anything spoiler wise. It basically is like a smaller version of the template that you're using over the course of the entire narrative. So,
and I totally planned it.
Absolutely.
Honest.
There you go. We're going to have to wrap this one up soonish, but what other kind of things do we want to quickly mention about opening chat? Oh, one thing before we go into the other things as well. I think another key thing too that I try to do with my opening chapters is like, I really want my readers to feel like they have no choice but to read the first 4 chapters before they can even think about putting the book down. And like I try to accomplish
right about when people put my book down after
they
No, I'm serious though. I'm serious though, because after 4 chapters, you've gone through 4 different POVs and people are like, what's going on?
It's pretty polarizing, I suppose. And they'll either know if they like it or dislike it at that stage. But what I really try to do is like have, some meaningful cliffhangers or some sort of hook that's going to pull people from chapter 1 through to chapter 2. And I want to make sure that there's almost some kind of like sequence that is drawing them through those opening chapters. And when that sequence ends and I give a chapter closing with some sort of finality and an opportunity for them to put the book down, it's ideally, like a couple of chapters into the book, so that they have got enough of the story world that they hopefully like it enough to continue, or they're not going to continue at all. And I think that's an important thing to consider as well, is like, just, as with your opening lines, how you want to make sure they're reading the next few lines, consider how you can draw them through those opening chapters so that you're really giving the best opportunity possible for your story to kind of appeal to readers so that they can hopefully continue on from there.
If you get them to chapter 4, they're probably committed.
Yeah, exactly. So just really think about how you can have suspense that pulls them through there. Hopefully that will then make them get attached to the characters or the world or the plot or whatever. Any other?
Totally agreed. Points? No, I think set tone and feel. Though I have read books that suddenly switch tone in the middle of a chapter and it's like shocking and beautiful. And the rest of the book is just some hellish landscape of survival, and that kind of stuff can be really fascinating too. But portal fantasies sometimes start that way. They'll start a specific way and then suddenly people are thrust into another kind of world where they have to survive, basically, when they've never had to try before. But for the most part, you want to give people the idea of what kind of book this is.
And hopefully that's a good book.
We could actually stay on topic fairly well there. I feel like maybe I let everybody down by not derailing things better.
No, I thought we definitely got derailed, but it wasn't you that derailed it. It was actually me by bringing.
You took up the slack. Sweet, thanks, dude.
I derailed it with you.
Oh,
yeah,
nicely done.
I think I did.
Can I just
myself?
We need to do a
the book cover thing. That was me.
You and Bengali, because I mean, your first chapter, you've got a load of spit. Ben's first chapter, he's got a character shitting in a box.
What book is that? Amanda?
That's Chasing Graves.
Chasing Graves, yeah.
Yes. I got to read that.
That's this one, Chasing Graves by Bengali. And I can't remember. I don't think it's the end. I think it's literally the beginning of the first chapter is a character shitting in a box.
There you go.
And then locking the box.
Uh-oh. Where does the box go?
Let's
Does he mail it
get
to an
Ben
enemy?
on and talk about that with him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. He'll be like, okay, so you've got me on to talk about like blurbs or something, and we're like, yes,
Yeah.
we're going to talk about blurbs,
Sure.
Ben. We promise.
The shit in the
Little will
box
he know.
episode.
Yeah. Where and when should you have bodily functions in a book?
We do
All the
actually have,
time, as far as according to Fletcher.
no joke, in our brainstorming document, we do actually have an episode titled the bodily fluids episode, and it's been there from the beginning. So it's only a matter of time.
It's coming.
Poor choice of words.
Maybe episode
Oh.
100 or something. That can be our celebration. Anyway, we should probably wrap this one up before it goes any more off the rails than it currently is. I feel like we're off the rails and we're like on horseback going through a canyon now that's flooding. So we're very
It's a
far.
lovely visual representation
more,
there.
more like very small burrows.
Very small burrows. Yeah.
Yeah.
One
Do
of
we
us
have to be
is
riding
putting
horses?
paws.
I mean, Dyrk should be riding a sloth.
So he was the first
My-
to be claimed by the flood waters.
My main character in this first thing, the opening scene, he's riding a pig on the beach, watching dragon riders fly around over the ocean.
Oh, hell yes.
Riding a
Nice.
pig.
Is there any pooping in small crates?
No.
See, Jed's just
Fix that.
obsessed now.
There
Didn't
will
realize
be
you could do this.
there
I
will
just
be a
didn't
scene
realize this
where
was
there
available
will
to
be a
authors.
scene where a kraken stands over a bad guy character and empties its bowels on him.
Nice. It wouldn't be a Michael Fletcher book if it
Half
wasn't for that.
digested fish and such.
And I can scarcely wait. All right, we should wrap up this episode.
It's gone wrong. It's all gone horribly
So
wrong.
bad.
Bail.
It was Mike who was saying, "Hey, it hasn't been derailed yet. Let me fix that." All right. Thank
Oh
you.
god, if
everybody.
anybody's listened to the last few minutes of this
No.
episode.
Oh, look at the cute Mando.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We will see you next time. Bye. If you would like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/wizardswarriorswords, and you can check out all of the different bonuses that you can get for supporting the show. Things like free advanced reader copies, priority Q&A access, and editorial feedback. And thank you also to our high-tier Patreon, Daniel Henderson.